Usually when you look at a photograph of a traditional Japanese landscape, or if you've been lucky enough to actually walk through one, your brain just sort of automatically categorizes the spiritual architecture.
Yeah, it happens almost subconsciously.
Exactly. Like you see the massive sweeping tiled roof of a Buddhist temple, and maybe you catch that faint, earthy smell of incense burning.
Oh, yeah.
And you just think, right, that's Buddhism. That's a foreign import that, arrived via the Silk Road.
Yeah, it has a very distinct aesthetic.
It really does. And then, maybe half a mile down the road, you step off the pavement and you see this stark, minimalist, beautiful wooden torii gate.
Standing right at the entrance to an ancient cedar forest, usually.
Right. And you hear the crunch of gravel underfoot and you think, okay, that's Shinto. That's the indigenous native religion of Japan.
It's a very comfortable way to look at history, honestly.
Because it feels clean, right, organized.
It does. It gives the impression of two completely different operating systems running on the exact same societal hardware.
And running without ever cross-contaminating each other's code, basically. We just have this deeply ingrained habit of viewing them as two distinct parallel tracks.
Parallel tracks that, occasionally wave at each other from across the street.
Yeah, exactly. But then you start actually digging into the historical source material we have for this deep dive today, and you realize that neat little categorization is just a total illusion.
A complete illusion.
We are looking at a massive stack of medieval texts, theological treatises, and historical analyses, and the truth they reveal is kind of startling.
It really changes how you see the entire culture.
It does. For the vast majority of recorded Japanese history, those tracks weren't parallel at all. They were completely entangled into an impossibly complex, singular cosmic system.
It is the absolute definition of theological muddy waters.
Muddy waters is a great way to put it.
And frankly, it stands as one of the most fascinating intellectual, cultural, and political achievements in human history.
We're looking at a civilization that took two radically different worldviews, right?
Right. One local, animated by natural spirits, and one universal, governed by strict karmic laws.
And they just slowly engineered them into a single, cohesive reality. So that is our mission for this deep dive.
It's a big mission.
It is. We are going to trace the actual architecture of this fusion, and we're leaning heavily on the historical periodization established by researcher Yoshida Kazuhiko to understand this mind-bending philosophy.
A philosophy known as Honchi Suijaku.
Right. So we're going to travel back to the 8th century, a time of terrifying plagues, and meet local gods who were so desperate they actually begged humans for help.
Which is just a wild concept.
It really is. From there, we'll map the centuries-long theological arms race to mathematically link these deities, crack open the esoteric matrix that made the fusion possible, and then finally
look at the violent political climax that eventually smashed the whole system to pieces.
Exactly. So to really grasp the gravity of how these two massive religious frameworks collided, where do we start?
Well, we have to strip away our modern preconceptions of peaceful coexistence and go back to Yoshida Kazuhiko's period I.
Okay, so roughly the mid-8th century to the late 11th century.
Correct. And if you know your history, the mid-8th century in Japan was essentially a rolling series of apocalypses.
Oh, yeah. Just nonstop disaster. You've got smallpox wiping out a third of the population, right?
Smallpox, widespread crop failures, massive earthquakes.
It was a time of profound, inescapable trauma for everyone.
It really was. The political establishment was terrified, and the general populace was just living in a state of constant grief and instability.
And naturally, when society is under that level of existential stress, people turn to their gods for answers.
Of course. But the historical records from this time reveal something incredibly strange.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
The relationship between the indigenous beliefs, what we loosely call Shinto today, and the newly imported Buddhism wasn't a peaceful handshake.
It wasn't two philosophies trying to comfort the masses together?
No. The Syncretism actually began as a desperate cry for help from the kami themselves.
Hold on. If you're listening to this and thinking, wait, a cry for help from the gods, that requires a massive mental shift.
It really does.
Because usually the whole point of a deity is that they're the ones you pray to for a lifeline,
Right. They're supposed to be the safety net.
You're saying the mighty, awe-inspiring spirits of the mountains and storms were the ones asking for a bailout.
They were. In the texts from this era, the fierce, localized Japanese gods undergo this radical rebranding.
A rebranding? Like how?
They are suddenly depicted as suffering beings, They're viewed as lost souls who are basically trapped in their own power.
Okay, to understand why a god would be suffering, we really have to look at the Buddhist cosmology that was rapidly taking root in Japan at the time.
Yes, that's crucial.
I'm thinking specifically about the concept of the 6 realms of reincarnation, or Rokudo, right?
That is the absolute key to the entire phenomenon. In the Buddhist framework, existence is a cycle of rebirth.
And there are 6 distinct realms you can be born into based on your karma, correct?
Exactly. Starting from the bottom, you have the realm of hell, characterized by pure agony.
Not a great place to end up.
Definitely not. Above that is the realm of hungry ghosts, which are beings consumed by insatiable desires they can never fulfill.
And then the animal realm is next.
Right, the animal realm, driven by instinct and fear. Then you have the asuras, which are essentially warring titans consumed by jealousy and conflict.
So all of these are just varying degrees of suffering and ignorance.
Yes. Then there is the human realm, which is actually considered the best place to be if you want to achieve enlightenment.
Because it balances suffering and awareness, right? You're not in so much pain you can't think, but you're not so comfortable that you get lazy.
Exactly. And finally, at the very top, you have the devas, the heavenly beings.
And when Buddhism arrived and encountered the local Japanese kami, the Buddhist monks basically said, we know what you are. You belong in the deva realm.
Which sounds like a promotion at first glance.
Yeah. Right, like, hey, you're at the top of the pyramid.
But within the Buddhist framework, it's actually a trap.
A trap. How so?
The deva realm is a gilded cage. The beings there live incredibly long lives. They possess immense power, and they experience profound pleasure.
Okay, still sounds pretty good so far.
But they are still within the cycle of reincarnation. They are still subject to passions, pride, and anger.
Oh, I see.
And crucially, their lives will eventually end. When their good karma runs out, they will die and be reborn into a lower realm.
So they haven't achieved true enlightenment. They haven't escaped the system.
Exactly. So they are like a billionaire CEO.
Oh, I like this analogy.
They have the corner office, the private jet. Everyone caters to their every whim. But they are profoundly miserable because they are completely trapped in the corporate rat race.
Working 100-hour weeks, their blood pressure is through the roof.
And they know eventually they are going to age out or get fired. They have all the power, but absolutely no freedom.
That analogy captures the existential dread perfectly. This accumulated baggage of their existence is referred to in the texts as shukugo.
Right, shukugo. Heavy, unavoidable karma.
The local gods were suddenly seen as suffocating under the weight of their own shukugo.
Yes, and we have a very specific, chilling historical anecdote in our sources that illustrates this.
I think I know the one you mean.
It's the Oracle of Tado Myojin, the deity of the Tado region.
I remember reading this section in our research. It's almost haunting to imagine being a villager and hearing this.
Imagine the scene. You are at a local shrine, seeking protection from the plagues or the famines.
You're desperate.
The kami takes possession of a human oracle, a medium. The villagers expect a blessing, or perhaps a demand for an offering.
Right, the usual divine transaction.
Instead, the entity speaks through the medium and basically says, I have accumulated heavy karma shukugo over a long time.
And I am suffering the retribution of being a deity.
Exactly. And then the kami says, I want to take refuge in the 3 jewels of Buddhism to escape this status.
That just sends shivers down my spine. The god is explicitly saying being a god is actually a punishment.
Yes. My karma is terrible, and my own powers can't save me.
Please let me into your religion so I can stop suffering.
The kami is basically begging to abdicate its divine throne.
This phenomenon of the suffering god completely changed the spiritual landscape of Japan, didn't it?
It did. The human response to this divine plea wasn't just philosophical, it was intensely practical.
And architectural, right?
Yes. To save these suffering local gods, communities began building Buddhist temples directly attached to or right next door to Shinto shrines.
And this is the birth of the Jinguji. Jinguji, literally translating to shrine temples.
Exactly. We see the first appearances of this concept in texts like the Nihon Ryoki,
which is Japan's oldest collection of Buddhist legends. But what actually happened inside a Jinguji? Like if I walked into one in the 8th century, what would I see?
You would witness a profound sensory and ritualistic overlap.
So a mix of both traditions.
Yes. You would have the austere natural elements of the shrine, the sacred mirrors, the unplated wood,
sharing space with the elaborate incense-filled halls of the Buddhist temple.
And the rituals were highly targeted. Buddhist monks would gather in these complexes to chant incredibly powerful, complex texts.
Like the Heart Sutra or the Great Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, right?
Exactly. But they weren't chanting for the human congregation.
Wait, really? Who are they chanting for?
They were directing the merit of those sutras to the kami.
Oh, wow. They were preaching to the local gods.
They were attempting to educate them in the Dharma so the gods could achieve enlightenment and ease their shukugo.
So rather than Buddhism coming in like a conquering force and telling the locals, your mountain gods are fake, tear down your shrines.
Which is what often happens in religious history.
Right. Instead, they came in with an incredibly empathetic approach. They essentially said, your local gods are totally real, but they're deeply stressed out.
They are trapped in their own cosmic bureaucracy.
And Buddhism is the early retirement package they've been begging for.
It's an incredibly compassionate, additive form of assimilation.
Mm-hmm.
From a sociological standpoint, it is brilliant.
Because you don't ask a farming village to abandon the deity their ancestors have worshipped for countless generations.
Exactly. You validate their belief. You just inform them that their beloved deity needs a little spiritual assistance from the Buddha.
And the village can help facilitate that by building a Jinguji.
Yes.
But that creates a massive logistical problem for the villagers, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if the monks successfully preach to the kami, and the kami achieves enlightenment, doesn't the kami just vanish into nirvana?
Oh, yes.
If I'm a rice farmer, I need that local god to stick around and ensure it rains. I can't afford for my agricultural deity to transcend reality.
You've hit on the exact crisis of this early system.
Right. What do they do about that?
The solution to that problem introduces another crucial concept from our sources. Gohou Zenjin.
Gohou Zenjin, which translates to good deities protecting the Dharma.
Exactly.
So how did Gohou Zenjin solve the vanishing god problem? Where did this idea even come from?
The intellectual supply chain for this idea is fascinating. It was imported directly from Tang Dynasty China.
Okay, via the trade routes.
Carried across the ocean by the Kentoshi,
The official imperial envoys to China.
and the Nitsusu, the Japanese monks returning from decades of grueling study on the continent.
And we really should remember, these voyages across the sea to Tang China were incredibly dangerous.
Oh, perilous. Shipwrecks were common.
These scholars were risking pirates, typhoons, and disease to bring back the most cutting-edge philosophical, political, and religious technology in the world.
Their survival often depended on their belief in protective spirits.
That makes sense.
So when they brought back the concept of Gohou Zenjin, it offered the perfect compromise.
For the vanishing kami.
Yes. The idea posited that once these suffering local Japanese deities were saved by Buddhist teachings, they didn't just disappear into the void.
They stuck around.
Out of gratitude for their salvation, they took on a new job.
New job.
They became fierce, enlightened protectors of the Buddhist law. They became the spiritual bodyguards of the Jinguji complexes.
That is such an elegant fix.
It really is.
The kami gets the spiritual salvation they beg for, but they stay on as the head of local security.
The symbiotic relationship is perfectly balanced.
The Buddhas provide the macro-level cosmic salvation, and the enlightened kami provide the micro-level physical protection for the harvest in the village.
It stabilized the entire religious ecosystem.
Amazing.
But before we move into the next era, we need to dive into a very vital, somewhat controversial nuance highlighted by researcher Yoshida Kazuhiko.
I know the terminology debate you're talking about, and it's a huge paradigm shift. Let's get into it.
Historically, scholars have looked at this early phenomenon of the suffering kami wanting to escape their state and labeled it Shinto Ridatsu.
Which translates as departure from the kami body.
Right. Meaning the traditional interpretation was simply that the gods hated being physically bound to a mountain or a tree.
And just wanted to drop their physical form to become ethereal spirits.
Correct. But Yoshida Kazuhiko argues that this interpretation is way too narrow.
Too narrow.
He states that the phenomenon should accurately be called Shinto Ridatsu.
Shinto Ridatsu. Which means departure from Shinto?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Departure from Shinto. So they don't just want a new body. They want to quit the entire company.
That is the core of it.
Mm.
Yoshida Kazuhiko is pointing out that the kamis weren't just fleeing a physical sensation of suffering.
They were fleeing the theology.
They were actively attempting to escape the entire theological system of native Japanese belief.
Because the indigenous system, which was highly focused on ritual purity, the immediate physical world, averting disasters.
And securing good harvests.
Right. It was highly effective for day-to-day survival, but it fundamentally lacked a framework for ultimate cosmic salvation.
It had no eschatology.
So Shinto Ridatsu implies the gods were looking around at the architecture of their own religion and realizing, wait, there's no exit door here.
Exactly.
We can make the crops grow, we can cause a typhoon, but we have absolutely no mechanism to liberate ourselves from the cycle of time.
They recognized the systemic limitations of their own existence. Buddhism offered the exit door.
So the gods were departing from the limitations of their own systemic framework.
It elevates the 8th century syncretism from a mere merging of rituals to a profound theological defection by the deities themselves.
Which is just incredible to think about. And that brings us to the next massive phase of this deep dive.
Moving into Yoshida Kazuka's period 2.
Right, which covers the late 11th century all the way into the 15th century.
Yes.
At this point, the kami and the Buddhas have been living as roommates in these Jinguji complexes for a few hundred years.
And the monks are chanting to the gods are protecting the temples, as Gohou Zenjin. Gohou Zenjin.
It sounds highly functional.
Functionally, it was a success. But intellectually, for the monastic scholars and theologians, it was becoming messy.
A crisis was brewing.
The scholars realized that just having the kami and Buddhas living next door to each other in a state of mutual gratitude wasn't enough to explain the universe.
It's like having two massive, complex software programs running on your computer at the exact same time.
Right.
They might not be crashing the system today, but unless you write a bridge code to explain how they interact at the kernel level,
Eventually, something's going to break.
they needed a unified theory of everything.
They needed to explain the mechanics of the cosmos. Why were these two completely different sets of deities able to interact so seamlessly?
And over several centuries, we see a fascinating evolution of religious vocabulary in the source texts as scholars tried to patch this theological software.
It was an intellectual arms race.
Let's trace that evolution, because the words they chose reveal so much about how their worldview was expanding.
Absolutely. First, we see the widespread acceptance of the concept of Suijaku, meaning trace or manifestation.
Think of walking through a forest and seeing a footprint in the mud.
Okay.
The footprint isn't the person, but it is undeniable proof of their presence.
It's a localized trace left behind by a larger entity.
Yes. The early theologians started hypothesizing that the local Japanese gods, the kami of the mountains and rivers, were the Suijaku. They were the localized footprints left behind by something far greater and universal.
Exactly.
But at this early stage, they hadn't quite defined what that something greater was. They just knew the kamis were avatars of a larger force.
They were feeling their way in the dark. But around the mid-11th century, the texts reveal a major breakthrough.
What happened?
Another term begins to heavily dominate the intellectual discourse. Hongoku.
Hongoku, meaning original enlightenment.
This was a radical, highly controversial idea. Hongaku, posits that enlightenment isn't some distant goal you have to strive for over thousands of lifetimes.
Really? Then what is it?
It suggests that enlightenment is the original intrinsic state of all things.
So every blade of grass, every rock, and every person is inherently fundamentally enlightened from the very beginning.
Yes.
It's kind of like a mirror, right? The mirror is perfectly reflective by nature.
I like that analogy.
But over time, it gets covered in the dust of ignorance and greed. You don't have to build a new mirror to see your reflection. You just have to wipe away the dust to reveal the Hongaku, the original state underneath.
That mirror analogy is exactly how the medieval monks debated it.
So how does Hongaku bridge the gap between Buddhas and kami?
Well, it suggests that if everything possesses original enlightenment, then the local kami, too, are part of this grand, inherently enlightened fabric.
They aren't separate, inferior beings.
Right. They share the same fundamental nature as the cosmic Buddhas.
The theological gap is closing, but they still need the final piece of the puzzle to lock the system into place.
And that intellectual evolution finally converges on the ultimate term, Honchi. Honchi, the original ground or the true nature.
When you connect Honchi, and Suijaku, you achieve the grand unified theory.
You get the completed, elegant Suijaku system.
Exactly.
Okay, let's lay this out clearly for the listener, because this is the crux of 1,000 years of history. What are the actual mechanics of the Suijaku Honchi Suijaku system.
The completed theory argues this. The universal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the Buddhist pantheon are the true, original source of reality.
They are the Honchi, the original ground. Yes. However, the raw, ultimate truth of the universe is too blinding, too overwhelmingly complex for ordinary people to comprehend.
I mean, if a multidimensional cosmic Buddha radiating pure enlightenment just suddenly appeared in a Japanese farming village in the 9th century, the people wouldn't be comforted.
They'd be terrified.
It's like trying to stare directly into the sun.
The human mind would shatter. So, out of immense, boundless compassion, these universal Buddhas deliberately dimmed their light.
They softened their overwhelming presence.
And chose to manifest locally, taking on the familiar, approachable forms of the Japanese kami.
So the kami are the Suijaku, the localized, customized traces of the Buddhas.
Yes, the kamis aren't separate beings at all.
They are literally the Buddhas wearing a local disguise so as not to overwhelm the populace.
It is a breathtaking synthesis. And the Japanese didn't just leave this as a vague, poetic concept.
They formalized it?
They built a highly specific, rigorous one-to-one matching system across the entire country.
Every major native kami was explicitly paired with a specific Buddha or Bodhisattva.
Yes.
How intricate did this mapping get?
Incredibly intricate. The most famous example involves Amaterasu, the supreme sun goddess of the Shinto pantheon.
The mythical ancestor of the imperial family.
Under the Honchi Suijaku system, theologians identified Amaterasu as the Suijaku.
The localized manifestation.
The localized manifestation of Dainichi Nyorai.
Dainichi Nyorai, being the great cosmic sun Buddha of Esoteric Buddhism.
Yes. The local sun goddess is declared the direct interface for the universal sun Buddha. They are the same entity.
Wow.
And they did this for hundreds, thousands of deities. Hachiman, the god of archery and war, was identified as the manifestation of Amida Buddha.
The god of a specific sacred mountain was paired with a specific bodhisattva of compassion.
The entire landscape of Japan was mapped onto the Buddhist cosmos.
But I have to push back here, just thinking about human nature.
Okay, push back.
If I'm a local shrine priest in medieval Japan, and my family has guarded and worshipped our specific supreme mountain god for 10 generations, aren't I deeply offended?
Why would you be offended?
Well, suddenly an elite scholar monk from the capital shows up and says, hey, your supreme god is just a shadow or a trace of our foreign Buddha. Doesn't that sound incredibly condescending?
I see your point.
How did they sell this to the locals without starting a holy war?
It's a vital question. To our modern ears, being called a trace sounds like a demotion.
It sounds like you're being told your god is just a junior partner in a cosmic conglomerate.
Exactly. It sounds like a corporate buyout where the local brand gets sidelined.
Right.
But we have to inhabit the medieval mindset. In that era, being told that your local god was a customized manifestation of the ultimate universal truth was the ultimate upgrade in cosmic status.
An upgrade. Walk me through the psychology of that.
Or think about it. Before this system, your local mountain god was just a local mountain god.
They were powerful in your specific valley.
They could bring rain to your specific crops, but they were completely irrelevant to the rest of the universe.
Oh, I see.
By linking your local god to a universal Buddha through the Honchi Suijaku system, your village shrine was suddenly hardwired directly into the fabric of the entire cosmos.
Wow. Your local harvest festival was no longer just about farming. It was a localized expression of universal enlightenment.
Exactly. It provided an unparalleled sense of inclusion.
The local people didn't have to change their rituals, they didn't have to learn Sanskrit, and they didn't have to abandon their shrines.
They simply expanded their understanding of what those rituals meant on a universal scale.
That is profound. But my head is spinning a bit thinking about the sheer scale of the logistics.
The logistics were staggering.
To pull off this massive one-to-one matching of thousands of local gods with specific Buddhas, ensuring there are no theological contradictions. You can't just use nice poetry and good intentions.
No, you can't.
You need a rigorous, underlying logic engine. You need the math to back it up.
You need a mainframe capable of handling infinite variables.
And that brings us to the core engine running the entire Honchi Suijaku system.
To understand how they made the math work, we have to look deeply at Mikkyo.
Esoteric Buddhism. This is the philosophical backbone of the entire operation.
If Honchi Suijaku is the highly functional software interface that the people interact with, Mikkyo is the complex operating system running invisibly in the background.
And esoteric Buddhist philosophy is vast, mathematically precise, and highly structured.
It can be an incredibly intimidating topic.
Where is the best entry point to understand Mikkyo?
Mikkyo. The best place to start is at the absolute center. At the heart of the Mikkyo cosmology is the supreme cosmic Buddha we just mentioned, Dainichi Nyorai.
Known in Sanskrit as Mahavairocana.
Yes, the great illuminator. But it is crucial to understand that Dainichi Nyorai, isn't just a powerful bearded figure sitting on a cloud passing judgment. The radical philosophical stance of Mikkyo is that Dainichi Nyorai is the universe itself.
Wait, is the universe?
The entire cosmos.
Yeah.
Every star burning in the sky, every grain of sand on the beach, every fleeting thought in your mind.
And every single local deity in every village.
Is quite literally an emanation, a physical manifestation of Dainichi Nyorai.
So it's not a creator and creation dynamic. It's not that he built the universe and stepped back. He is the very fabric of reality.
It is a philosophy of radical, inescapable interconnectedness.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
And there is a specific vital term used in the esoteric text to describe this relationship. Eizu.
Translating roughly to images or reflections.
Yes. In Mikkyo, all deities in the world, all phenomena, all physical matter are merely Eizu, reflections of this one supreme truth. Dainichi Nyorai is Dainichi Nyorai.
It's like standing in a room made entirely of mirrors. Everywhere you look, you see a different angle, a different fragment, but it's all reflecting the same single light source in the center of the room.
That captures the geometry of it perfectly. It is a vast 3D holographic cosmology.
Every single part contains a reflection of the whole.
Now, what the Honchi Suijaku theory did was take this overwhelmingly complex, multidimensional holographic cosmology of Mikkyo,
and cleverly flatten it into an elegant, manageable dual relationship that the average person could grasp.
Exactly. They simplify the higher dimensional math for everyday use.
They reduce the infinite reflections into a clear binary. The Buddha, which is the source, the Honji, and the Kami, which is the customized local interface, the Suijaku.
It made the infinite accessible.
So let me make sure I'm getting this. In modern IT terms, is it kind of like Dainichi Nyorai? Dainichi Nyorai is the massive main server or the cloud, and all the local Kami across Japan are just local access points or digital avatars optimized for the user.
Exactly. That is the perfect modern framework for this.
Really?
The esoteric monks were essentially 11th century software engineers. Let's build on that IT analogy because it illuminates the sheer genius of the system.
Please do. Let's unpack the medieval cloud.
Think about the cloud Dainichi Nyorai. The cloud contains all the data of the universe.
It is infinite, raw, absolute information.
The ultimate truth of reality. But raw binary code, no matter how profound, is completely useless to a medieval Japanese rice farmer who is terrified that a drought is going to starve his family.
Right. You can't farm with binary code. You can't pray to a server rack. It's too abstract.
The farmer cannot interact with the raw data. The friction is too high.
So what does the system do?
The cloud projects a highly user-friendly app. It generates a digital avatar.
That avatar is the local Kami.
Yes. The app is perfectly localized, translated into the cultural language the farmer understands, and heavily optimized for their specific regional needs like rain or protection from disease.
So the fierce Kami of the local mountain, the one who brings the spring rains, is simply the app interface for the universal compassion of the Buddha.
It's the exact same underlying data. The source code of compassion is identical.
It is just wearing a different user interface.
The Honchi Suijaku system, powered by the immense processing power of Mikkyo, allowed the Japanese populace to keep all their familiar, beloved local apps running on their mental desktops,
while possessing the deep, comforting knowledge that they were securely, safely connected to the ultimate cosmic server.
That is the genius of it.
Honestly, that is breathtaking.
It's a masterpiece.
The intellectual architecture required to build that is staggering. To harmonize thousands of disparate, often contradictory local beliefs into one unified, mathematically precise cosmic system.
And to do it without destroying or disrespecting the local culture.
It's a masterpiece of human thought.
It truly is a monumental achievement of synthesis. It wasn't just philosophy, it was a religious operating system that successfully stabilized Japanese society, politics, and culture for centuries.
Yeah.
I think we should just pause for a second and let the sheer scale of that architectural feat sink in.
Yeah, I mean, let's just sit with that for a
It's
second.
a lot to take in.
Just imagining the generations of monks and scholars painstakingly mapping this out by candlelight.
Debating the specific traits of a river god to ensure it mathematically aligned with the correct emanation of a bodhisattva.
Like, update the database. This kami is now confirmed as an Izu of canon. It's incredible.
And it wove the physical landscape of Japan so tightly into the spiritual fabric of Buddhism that they became entirely indistinguishable.
Okay, so we've spent this deep dive exploring how Japan built this incredibly beautiful, intricate, deeply integrated system.
A perfect synthesis.
They solved the existential crisis of the 8th century. The kamis are saved from their shukugu.
Shukugu. The Buddhas are localized.
What? The cosmos is mapped, and the society is stabilized. It sounds like a happily ever after.
It does. But history rarely tolerates a static happily ever after.
Oh, no.
The harmony of the Honchi Suijaku system was deeply tied to the stability of the state.
Right.
And when human politics, warfare, and ambition get involved in the cosmic mainframe, things fall apart.
I can feel the crash coming. We're moving into the final phase of our timeline.
And just a warning to you listening, we are only going to tease this collapse today.
The full breakdown of this 1,000-year system is so complex it requires its own dedicated exploration. But give us the trailer. How does a system this perfect begin to crack?
We have to fast forward to Yoshida Kazuhiko's period 3 and 4, starting around the 15th century.
Okay, fast forwarding a few centuries.
Japan descends into unimaginable chaos. The tipping point is the Onin no Ran.
The Onin War, a decade of unimaginable destruction.
A massive, brutal civil war that literally burns the capital city of Kyoto to the ground.
So the centralized political authority completely collapses.
The great temples, the hubs of this theological network, are reduced to ashes.
And in this immense societal chaos, the unified theological system starts to fracture.
It makes sense. When the physical society burns, the religious consensus that held it together burns with it.
Out of the ashes and the political vacuum of the Onin no Ran, a fascinating, highly ambitious man named Yoshida Kanetomo rises to prominence.
Yoshida Kanetomo. What is his move? If he's looking at a ruined Kyoto, I'm guessing he doesn't want to rely on the old, burned-out Buddhist establishment anymore.
Does he try to invent a third religion?
Even bolder than that. He looks at the Honchi Suijaku system, which has been the unquestioned established truth of the universe for centuries.
What does he do?
He completely flips it on its head. He creates a movement that becomes known as Yoshida Shinto.
Yoshida Shinto. And he makes a profoundly audacious claim.
Lay it on me.
Oh, wait, I think I know where this is going.
He claims that the entire system has been read backward. He states that the native Japanese kami are not the traces, the shadows, or the Suijaku.
He declares that the kami are the original roots, the pure source.
And the foreign Buddhas of India. They are merely the branches and the leaves.
Whoa, he just reverse engineered the entire universe.
You really did?
Using our analogy, he looked at the app and the server and told everyone, no, the local app is the actual source code. The massive cloud server is just an inferior extension generated by our local app.
It was a theological revolution born out of a desire for indigenous supremacy.
That is a massive shift.
And to make the intellectual environment even more volatile, you start seeing a massive influx of Neo-Confucianism and Taoism arriving from the continent.
So these new philosophies begin muddying the waters even further.
The clean, elegant mathematical system of Mikkyo, is suddenly competing with new, aggressive political ideologies.
So the system is cracking under its own intellectual weight, but also under the pressure of shifting political power.
It's cracking, but it's remarkably resilient. For the next few centuries, it still largely holds together at the local grassroots level.
People still love and rely on their Jinguji.
But then, we arrive at the ultimate historical bombshell.
Brace yourselves.
We skip all the way forward to the late 19th century, the Meiji era.
The dawn of modern Japan.
The new, highly centralized imperial government looks at this 1,000-year-old, deeply fused, tangled web of kami and Buddhas.
And decides it is an obstacle to modernization. It is no longer politically convenient.
The new government wants a clean, nationalist narrative to unify the country against Western colonial threats.
They don't want a messy, intertwined web. They want those clean, parallel tracks we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Exactly. They need a pure, state-sponsored, indigenous Shinto to rally the entire nation around the absolute authority of the emperor.
So the Meiji government issues decrees that change the spiritual and physical landscape of Japan forever.
What were the decrees? How do you legislate the dismantling of the cosmos?
Well, the primary legal framework was the Shinbutsu Bunri, which translates to the separation of kami and Buddhas.
But what followed wasn't just a legal separation.
It unleashed a wave of violent popular movement known as Haibutsu Kishaku. Haibutsu Kishaku.
Which translates terrifyingly to abolish Buddhism, destroy Gautama.
Destroy Gautama. That is incredibly aggressive. That's not a legal separation. That's a mandate for erasure.
It was an intense, physically violent severing. Picture the devastation. The deeply fused religious landscape, the beautiful Jinguji complexes that had stood for a millennia, are violently ripped apart.
Oh, wow.
Magnificent statues of Buddhas that had sat peacefully next to Kami for centuries are dragged out into the courtyards and smashed to dust.
Precious sutras are burned.
Monks are forced by the state to either instantly become Shinto priests or be violently defrocked and return to lay life.
Wait, they just smashed 1,000 years of philosophy. How did the people react? How did Buddhism survive?
To find out what happens in this violent and tragic climax, tune in to our next deep dive, Part 4.
Oh, that is cruel. You can't leave a cliffhanger like that.
Sorry, but you'll have to wait.
But you're right. The sheer density of what we covered today is enough to process for now. Wow, we have traversed an immense amount of historical and philosophical ground today.
We really have.
We started in the 8th century with suffering gods desperate for an exit strategy. We watched theologians build a cosmic user interface powered by esoteric Buddhism, and we ended on the brink of its total violent destruction.
It serves as a profound historical reminder that religion is never a static entity.
It's a living architecture.
Constantly adapting to the psychological needs, the environmental crises, and ultimately, the politics of humans practicing it.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final thought for today. You've seen how religion isn't just about pure faith. It's about vocabulary, systemic architecture, and survival.
It's about the deep human need to structure our understanding of a chaotic universe.
So I want you to think about the systems or the apps you interact with every day in your own life. How much of what we consider to be local or unique to our own specific culture or even intrinsic to our own personal worldview is actually just a highly localized, comforting interface for a much larger, complex, global server of ideas?
That is a very perceptive lens to view our modern world through.
And perhaps more importantly, considering how our story ended today with the fires of the Meiji era, what happens to your reality when someone in power decides to unplug your interface? Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the source material with us. We will see you next time as we explore the fallout of the Great Severing.